dollars. I've read a lot about Lee Kuan Yew, and I've listened to a lot of his lectures, but I can't make this opportunity missed by asking you, what has happened? How did Singapore do this?
I can do no better than to recommend the writings of Lee Kuan Yew. He was a realist. He accepted the world for what it was. We were, like you, very allied to the British. Then under Harold Wilson, the British decided to withdraw from the region, 1968. And at that time, it was 40% of our economy. Singapore was a garrison island. Huge RAF, Royal Navy, British Army. He flew immediately to London to persuade the British to delay for a few years. But that's all they were able to give him. But after that, turning British military assets into economic assets, Changi Airport, Sembawang shipbuilding, various things. And then he saw that the future was with the US. So in 1968, I think, remarkably, as Prime Minister, he took a sabbatical and spent 3 months in Harvard, where he got to know people like Henry Kissinger. The Vietnam War at the time was raging. But he knew that for Singapore to progress, we had to hitch ourselves onto the US bandwagon. And that allowed us to develop rapidly together with the other 3 Asian tigers, and we made rapid progress. Singapore is a tiny country. It's only 750 square kilometers. It's just about the size of Bahrain. That's all. But it's got a larger population than Oman. The only thing we have is our location and our people. For Singapore to have good infrastructure, it's not that difficult. For you to have your infrastructure, it's not easy, because you are spread over 300,000 square kilometers. But we are just 750 square kilometers. But we had to make sure that the airport, the port, the telecom system, the power supply, everything is tip-top, so that when you invest money in Singapore, you're almost certain to make money. And because people know that they'll make money, more investments come. Of course, now our economy has reached a certain maturity and there are a lot of challenges. But we have our people who are hardworking, so we invest a lot in education. Because education will determine what you as a human being is ultimately capable of. And there is a revolution in technology. We know the AI, robotization will replace repetitive skills, so we've got to prepare our people for a different future. But the important thing is we need a government which is always worried about the future, which thinks very hard about the future, which is always learning from others because you do not know enough, and then making the tough adjustments. And if you ask me what is Singapore's ultimate advantage, it is that we probably have the best public administration in the world. There is, and most of you who've been to Singapore, usually not just out of politeness, when you talk to me, you say, well, you had a good experience, because things work. And things work because we have a good public service. And that is, to me, Singapore's greatest advantage and Singapore's greatest inheritance from Lee Kuan Yew.
I want to ask you about the economic model in Singapore, because it is quite unique. I mean, to some of the free marketeers of this world, there isn't much taxes. I don't think you have inheritance tax, or do you have capital gain tax? I don't think that.
We don't have a capital gains tax. We used to have an inheritance tax, which we have abolished.
Right. Yeah. So in one way, it's a great tax haven. But then you look at the ownership of the government in a lot of the public services. In the housing, I think it's something like 80%, education, health, and others. How is that? Can you explain to us why is that a successful model?
Well, the key is you got to get rid of corruption. Because once you have corruption, the quality of the civil service deteriorates. People are no longer working for the public. They're working for their own private interests. So rooting out corruption was one of the most difficult things, but one of the most important things which Lee Kuan Yew did. And that enabled the public service to make continuing improvement and to be objective in the way it approaches work. But this can only work if people support it. If the people expect public servants to be corrupt, then they will be corrupt. So today, if a policeman is known to be accepting bribes, ordinary Singaporeans will report it because they know that's a wrong thing. Even if you have a parking ticket, you dare not bribe the policeman because you will get into trouble. And if he accepts it, he will get into trouble. So a system has to be supported by the entire population, which means national education, a sense of nationalism, is very important. When we left Malaysia in 1965, the first thing we did was to pick up the gun. Because without an armed force, you can't have real independence, you can't have real sovereignty. And Lee Kuan Yew at the time asked Nasser for help. He turned us down. He asked Nehru for help. He turned us down. In the end, he approached the Israelis. And the Israelis helped us build up our armed force. And today, after all these years, we take defense extremely seriously. So we probably have one of the strongest, well-equipped defense force in Southeast Asia. And it's based on national service. It's not based on a professional army. But we want the citizens to protect Singapore. They must have an interest in Singapore. So they must own a part of Singapore. And that's how the public housing program became so important. 85% of the homes built in Singapore are built by the government. They are sold to the people on 99-year leases so that it is their own. And when the country does well on the secondary market, the value of their properties go up. So they develop a powerful vested interest in the defense and in the well-being of the country. So there are many parts to what makes Singapore what it is. And I know that we have good relations with Oman, and Oman sometimes sends people to Singapore. But really, they are all covered very well and very succinctly in Lee Kuan Yew's memoirs.
Thank you. We'll open it to the floor now. Thank you.
All right. Now we're going to start the Q&A session. We're going to try to take as much questions as possible from different tables. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. The lady over there, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lamia Al-Haj, Sultan Qaboos University. Thank you very much for Sohar International for beautifully organizing this very enriching evening. My question is to the guests. Thank you very much for inspiring us today. We've heard a lot about the rapid development, both economical and technological, of China in the short span of years. My question is, what was the nudging point? What is the nudge or the tipping point that made the Chinese government not only catch up, but outcompete the technological and economical advancements in the United States?
I think the answer is in Chinese history and in the nature of the Chinese people. The Chinese people, throughout history, in the last 2,000 years, made up from 1/3 to 1/5 of the world's population. And during this period, they were often united as one country. No other ethnic group in the world shares this sense of having a common ancestry, common heroes, a common literature. Therefore, when China is united, the internal division of labor is very extensive, and it makes them remarkably productive. When we talk about the jewel musket, the 65,000 pieces of pottery, there was a Tang dynasty. They had kilns in Changsha and other parts of China, which made high-quality porcelains in vast quantities at remarkably low cost. We see that in China today. During the Ming Dynasty, in 1405 to around 1430, the Chinese sent vast fleets all the way to the Swahili coast. They came to Salalah. The emirals were Muslims, so they did the Umrah in Mecca. And there are speculations that some 4 detachments must have gone to the Mediterranean. We don't know. Now, think about this. China was under the Mongols in the 13th century. In 1368, they got rid of the Mongols and established the Ming Dynasty with the capital in Nanjing, 1368. By 1405, the fleets were unleashed. That's only 37 years. In 37 years, these armadas, at any one time, may have 20,000 people at sea. They were enormous ships. The jewel musket is about 18 meters long. The treasure ships of the Ming Dynasty, they were over 100 meters long. And they had compartments. And they had chicken farms, pigs. They had vegetable farms. They had soldiers, cartographers, diplomats. And they had shipyards all around the Indian Ocean to repair these ships. Can you imagine the economy China must have had to sustain all these voyages? And that's only in 37 years. It is 70 years since the establishment of the People's Republic. So what we are seeing in China today, against Chinese history, is perhaps not all that remarkable. And therefore, when we want to discern China's future, I think we can get important insights from studying China's past.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The next question, please. The gentleman over there.
Hey, Mr. George, thank you so much. My name is Jaland El-Hashmi. I'm from Harvard University. I'd like to ask you about how does education play as a major factor in the modern economy, and how do you see Oman, aligned to this vision? Thank you.
I think education is key. One reason why China is doing so well is because of the obsession with education. And again, this is not something current. It goes back a long time. For centuries, the Chinese had a monopoly of ink and paper technology. Compared to writing on parchment or on leaves, when you use paper and ink, you are able to process much more information. You're able to store much more information. And this enabled China to develop a much more complex economy. The programmers of that era were the scholars. Scholarship has always been ingrained into the Chinese culture. So when parents raise their children, the most important thing is that they must be educated. This is the origin of the tiger mother, the obsession with education. So it's not just having teachers and schools. Somehow the children must be taught from a young age that to become fully a human being, you must be educated. But of course, after that, we must talk about the content of education. And today we have a big challenge because of AI, because of automation, which means that if all you study are things which can be replaced by a computer, by an algorithm, or by a machine, then you're in trouble. So you must teach people how to learn, not just teach them. And this requires an environment, it requires a culture, it requires teachers and pedagogy which anticipates changes in the world. In many countries, the wealthy people, they're able to look after themselves. Their children will always be well educated. But it is the ability to educate large numbers so that the society as a whole is well educated. That is not easy. And that makes the difference between a successful country and a country which is not that successful. So if you look at the PISA ranking every year, where they subject children in the teens to tests, and they find that consistently East Asians score very high compared to other groups. And I put a lot of it to culture. And I do not know what is the situation in your country, but having strong families and families who are obsessed with education, giving respect to educated people, valuing knowledge, which I think is fully in the Islamic tradition. I think that's the most important.
All right, thank you. Next question, please.
Hello, everybody. My name is Abdullah Hassan Al-Baraiki from Sultan Qaboos University. Thank you, Sohar International, for this invitation here. I'm very glad to be among you. My question is, do you think that we can apply the Chinese or the Singaporean economic experiment here in Oman?
I don't know enough about the Omani society, but you have a very long history. You have a very strong sense of yourself. You have a very realistic view of the world. And therefore, I think these are very strong basics that you have. Minister Yusuf Alawi told me that a lot of the revenue that you gain from oil and gas went to infrastructure, which to me is a very good sign, because the Minister of Transportation is here, and I was telling him that my wife and I spent a night in the Jabal Akhdar last night, and we were amazed by the quality of infrastructure. You're a big country with a relatively small population, but it shows your priorities, that you're not just looking after the wealthy urbanites, but you're trying to reach out to the boondocks, to the rural areas, so that everybody can be educated and can be part of the modern economy. So to me, after not being here for 13 years, I'm very impressed by what this country has done and its priorities.
Thank you so much. The next question, the gentleman over there in the middle. Okay.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, sir.
Yes. He's over here.
My name is Gaurav Mahajan. We all know that technology is changing lives every day, and China is leading in the technological front. But one of the threats of technology is that it is also leading to job losses. For example, what 100 farmers could do with the new technology, new equipment, it can be done by 5 farmers. Now, with technological advancement at such a fast rate, where it might take away the jobs in a call center, maybe in other places, and artificial intelligence being there, countries like China, India, with bigger populations, how do you see the human resource getting deployed once these technological advances come into those areas, which they have already started? So we are talking about driverless cars, so we lose jobs in drivers. So how do countries with big population address future employability of human resource?
I think you have touched on probably the single most important issue in our lives today, which is the rapid technological change, which is dissolving old structures in human society and presenting new challenges to all of us. With the IT revolution and the social media, it is a serious disadvantage to grow old because we are less able to use the technology. We discovered in our general election some years ago a change that instead of older people influencing young people, we found younger people influencing their parents because of the access to the social media. They were seeing things which their parents at first did not see and then realized they did not see. Whether it is in schools, in government, in the mosque. If you are a doctor, you must expect that your patients have already Googled his symptoms before he saw you. So he's going to ask you a lot of questions. You can't just expect him to agree to everything you say or do. A teacher that treats his students as if they're just there to receive information, that doesn't accept being corrected by his students, I think that teacher cannot be effective. So to parents in the way we manage our children, because in many areas they know more than us. So there is an inversion in society. We are all conservative by nature, especially when we grow older. But conservative structures are being undermined by technology. And the technology is causing a further problem, which is rewarding people disproportionately. Today, there is a very obscene concentration of wealth in very few people. It is not noticed because, oh, well, it's Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or whatever. And people are not able to focus why they are not happy. But if the same inequality were to happen in the village, the knives will be out. Because it will not be tolerated. But it is the situation in the world today. And that's one reason why all over the world, in almost every country, there are social upheavals because of growing income and wealth inequality. Countries where the leadership are close to the general population and where the leaders have a heart for those who are less privileged, those societies will make the adjustments. You know, in China, Xi Jinping has been brutal in the way he tackled corruption. Hundreds of his top people and generals have committed suicide. Over 1 million have been sent to prison for corruption. And still is a problem far from being fully solved. He's made every provincial leader sign a written undertaking that there will be no one left behind in that province. So you don't find abject poverty, even in the 50th cities in China. But it's a big country and there are a lot of problems. And China has got to turn leftwards, become more socialist, in order to prevent social tensions from rising, because there are a lot of wealthy people in China, and they're living unbelievable lifestyles. And this can create a lot of resentment. So I was always fascinated how Sultan Qaboos used to spend months every year going to remote parts of the country to live there, so that he has a sense of the real living conditions of ordinary Omanis, not through reports or through ministers, but he himself at majlises, interacting. I would say the countries where the leaders organize the countries in smaller units and have leaders who are in touch with the ground, they will be able to anticipate tensions before they get out of control and resolve them and develop lifestyles which are modest, which enables them to relate, because you can't do things in secret. I mean, if you live a fantastic lifestyle, in the past, you might be able to be hypocritical and shield it from ordinary people. But today, with the social media, it all comes out. So you are what you are, not what you want people to think you are. So this is, to me, the single most important challenge in human society today, and how every society responds to growing divisions will decide its success or failure in the coming years.
Thank you so much, our honorable guests, for your valuable questions. We'll now move forward to the questions from our followers on social media platforms. The first question I have for you is, can the Middle East build a new industry by taking a share of the outsourcing market from Asia and China?
Hydrocarbons have been a blessing and a curse. When your economy is so dependent on hydrocarbons, the distortion makes every other sector too expensive. The Norwegians tried to solve this problem by taking that money into a national wealth fund so that it doesn't distort the rest of the economy. I think in the case of Oman, because it never had that much oil to begin with, and it may be running out. So we are forced to think harder about how to diversify. But if you are a country enormously blessed with hydrocarbon resources, I think it's very difficult for you to make the adjustment. And for as long as it lasts, maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, that can be your endowment. But technologies change. We've probably, because of the fears of climate change, there's a movement away from oil, movement to gas, to hydrogen, to alternative energy sources. And if you look at the position of Saudi Arabia, the Americans now are, I think, producing more oil than Saudi Arabia, or about to. And this is changing the geopolitics. And the technology may be adverse for those who are principally dependent on oil. I don't know. This is a big subject. A lot of very smart people are studying this and making bets on this. But I think we just have to watch and say, okay, this can happen, that can happen. Don't be too sure what scenario will eventuate, but anticipate the range of scenarios and be able to respond more or less to all of them.
Thank you. The next question is the trade war between the US and China driven more by desire to be the dominant power in the world rather than the economic reasons?
I think there is a deep insecurity in the US that China may become stronger than them. And if China behaves like the US, then I think war is inevitable. But happily, the Chinese have a very different view of themselves. The Americans are a missionary power. They believe in their system. They believe that it is the best system in the world, and that they should export it to others. And because of that, even though from time to time we get annoyed by their bossiness, there is a generosity in American society which we don't find elsewhere. You know, I'm a graduate from Harvard Business School. I'm not a US citizen. But when it comes to voting for the Board of Overseers, Board of Governors, I have one vote. There is unbelievable generosity to foreigners. I don't see China giving foreigners that kind of right. My youngest son had a bone marrow transplant in St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. My wife and my other children were there for 9 months. The treatment was entirely free because they said, you're not covered by insurance. We don't want the treatment to be affected. like how much it costs to pay for different drugs. And some of those drugs are experimental. Before Christmas, all of them were asked. I have 4 children. All of them were asked what Christmas gifts they wanted. So they wrote merrily, you know. And all their wishes were granted by charity. I don't think any other society would be as generous, not only to its own people, but also to foreigners. So we have 2 sides to America. One is that side which we sometimes resent, but the other is also a genuine desire to do good, to help others. China is the opposite. China's approach is, it's like being Arab. If you're not born an Arab, you cannot be an Arab. I mean, you may like the food, you may have the name, you can be a Muslim, but if you're not an Arab, you can't be an Arab. Similarly, if you're not born a Chinese, it's very difficult to be a Chinese. And the Chinese have no wish for others to become Chinese. The Americans want us to be Americans. That's the difference. And because of that, when they talked about the dissident track, I don't think there is necessary conflict between China and the US. But there's no guarantee in such matters. Accidents will happen. And those of us who are men of goodwill should try and be peacemakers and not troublemakers.
We have another question about the US-China crisis. Is the US following a China containment policy?
I think the US would like to contain China, but it's too late. So where they can stop China's progress, I think they will try to. And sometimes there are issues which they could exploit, maybe like Xinjiang, like Hong Kong. I think the Chinese are aware of it. So the Chinese play the game, and they try also to develop counterholds on the US. So while smaller countries may have to follow everything the US says about Iran, the Chinese will only follow halfway, not the other half. And North Korea, while keeping to UN sanctions, I think the Chinese are helping the North Koreans through activities like tourism, which is not covered under sanctions.
Thank you. And our final question from our followers on social media platforms is China's One Belt, One Road initiatives an example of China's checkbook diplomacy?
Initially, there was checkbook diplomacy, and they lost a lot of money. Western commentators talk about China's strategy of creating debt traps. And they often cite the example of Hambantota in Sri Lanka. I don't buy that. I think the Chinese don't want to lose money. Sometimes the government wants companies to do this or that, and they comply. But they are learning, and they are trying very hard not to lose money. In the case of Hambantota, I have some familiarity because there's my group includes Shangri-La, and the former president, Rajapaksa, he was looking after his own political base in the south. The best location would have been Trincomalee, which was a Royal Navy base, but that's mostly Tamil. So he wanted to favor his own supporters. So it's going to be a port, airport, and highway from Colombo to Hambantota. And we were encouraged to build a Shangri-La there. But the port did not take off. So they did a debt equity swap. And now Chinese ships hub in Hambantota. And so the port has become viable. Property prices have gone up. Shangri-La is doing well. And, well, that's what financial restructuring means. But the Chinese, I don't think, set out in order to lose money. I don't think they're that stupid. But of course, many countries are worried that they become too dependent on China. If you take Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan is a big country, 2.8 million square kilometers. That's a very big country. A population of less than 20 million. And a very important country for the Belt and Road. So when the Kazakhs deal with China, they know that they are very small compared to China. If they're not careful, it is like plugging your mobile phone to a power station. You get a very bad shock. So the Kazakhs seek diversification. And I tell my American and Japanese and European friends that wherever there is a Belt and Road, they are free riders. Because China will have to finance some of the connectivity. But all those countries which are connected, automatically, naturally, will want diversification. They want the Americans, the Europeans, and the Japanese to come in too. To feel that they have more leverage vis-a-vis China. So that they have alternatives. But Americans, unfortunately, are taking the position that the Belt and Road is no good and are actively telling countries not to take Chinese investments for infrastructure. And sometimes telling countries that you have to choose between China and me. For countries that live near China, they will not want to make this choice. For countries far away, depending on the Americans, they may make that choice. But I don't think that's good foreign policy on the part of the Americans.
With that, we conclude our Q&A session. Thank you so much for your valuable questions, and thank you, Mr. George Yong-Boon Yu, for your insightful answers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your Highness, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to request Mr. Muhammad Mahfoud Al-Ardi to present a memento of appreciation to Mr. George Yong-Boon Yu. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, Your Highness, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up the 4th edition of Viewpoints. I kindly request our esteemed guests to fill in the feedback forms available on your tables to help us further improve and enhance the forum to fulfill your requirements. On behalf of Sohar International, thank you all for making time in your busy schedules to join us here today. And we are optimistic that today's session has left you with some thoughts that each one of you can take forward and make valuable use of to further advance our beloved nation. I would like to request you all to proceed to the buffet area and have your dinner. Thank you once again. Good evening and goodbye.